All the people on Earth at some point looked at the sky and told the same story. Powerful beings descended to interact with humanity. We gave them many names: gods, angels, demons, and over time we archived all these accounts on the shelf of mythology. Modern science convinced us to see them as metaphors, superstitions of an ignorant past. This classification, however, ignores a very important detail. What if, instead of legends, these are the oldest eyewitness reports describing a real and global contact event? To investigate this possibility, we set faith and interpretation aside and use a tool of pure logic: advanced artificial intelligence. We fed the Pneuma analytical system with an unprecedented volume of data. All the sacred, apocryphal, and mythological texts that humanity has produced were digitized and entered. The Bible, the Quran, the Vedas, the Sumerian cuneiform tablets, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Book of Enoch, and countless medieval chronicles. The order given to the system was direct: ignore the sacred, sin, and salvation. Analyze only the patterns in the raw facts, the actions, the physical descriptions, the reported technologies, and the documented consequences. The initial result shook the foundations of research. The probability of hundreds of cultures, without any contact with one another, having invented the same creatures with the same behaviors, is effectively zero. What the data shows is not a shared myth, but rather a consistent record of contact with an advanced and unknown life form. This changes everything. We are no longer talking about religion. We are talking about an unrecognized historical event. The analysis began with the names. The word angel, for example, comes from the Greek angelos and simply means messenger. The term does not imply goodness or feathered wings, defining only a position, a function. Similarly, demon from the Greek daimon originally meant divinity or distributing spirit, without the malignant connotation it acquired later. At this point, the data revealed something impossible to ignore. In more than half of the ancient texts, the activities attributed to angels and demons do exactly the same thing. Both arrive from the heavens, deliver messages, execute judgments, punish the disobedient, and use tools that to the ancients seemed like pure magic. They act like different departments of the same organization. The popular image of angels as ethereal beings of light completely dissolves under the close scrutiny of the original texts. In the book of Genesis, the messengers who visit Abraham are not ghostly apparitions. They sit, eat meat and bread, drink milk, and knead their dusty feet from the journey to be washed. They are physical entities with biological needs. The story deepens in the banned Book of Enoch, where 200 of these beings, called Watchers, descend to Earth and establish physical relationships with human women. And from this union, hybrid children are born, the giants known as Nephilim. The biology here is undeniable. Simulations based on these accounts confirm that to perform certain tasks, such as the annihilation of entire cities or the destruction of armies in a single night, these beings needed not only solid bodies, but an arsenal with absolutely devastating firepower. The description that the prophet Ezekiel makes of the cherubim is perhaps the clearest evidence of this technology. He did not see glorious men with swan wings. He described, with the language he had, what appears to be a complex machine, a shiny metallic structure with multiple faces, a system of wheels within wheels that allowed instantaneous movement in any direction, a body covered in eyes, perhaps sensors or lights, and a deafening noise that he compared to the sound of many waters. When this detailed description was processed by aeronautical engineering software, the closest match was not with any biological being, but with a vertical takeoff and landing vehicle. The design compatibility reached 89%. Nothing, however, prepares the mind for what the analysis found next. It is in our primal reaction to them. Almost all accounts of encounters with angels in the scriptures begin with the same phrase said by the creature to the terrified human, "Do not be afraid." The implication of this chills the blood. If a being of pure light, love, and goodness appears before you, why is the first thing it needs to do to calm an overwhelming dread? The recorded human reaction is not one of peace, joy, or spiritual ecstasy. It is of absolute panic. People fall with their faces to the ground, lose the ability to speak, their bodies freeze. The study of these reactions is conclusive. Far from being reverence, this is the instinctive and biological response of prey before a predator. It is the shock of a nervous system overloaded before something incomprehensibly powerful and dangerous. The conclusion that these entities were physical, technological, and provoked primal fear leads us to an inevitable question. If they were here interacting with our world, where are the scars? A force capable of paralyzing humans with terror would not pass through history without leaving a trail of destruction. In fact, the trail exists. It is documented in ancient texts, not as myths, but as field reports of direct military interventions, where the outcome of a battle was decided not by men, but by incomprehensible technology. Jerusalem, year 701 BC. The Assyrian king Sennacherib, a ruthless conqueror in command of the most powerful war machine of the time, cornered the city. For the defenders, defeat was not a possibility. It was a mathematical certainty. King Hezekiah, in despair, prays in his temple for an impossible salvation, and then something happens during the night. By morning, the siege is over. The Assyrian army is gone. The reason was that 185,000 of its best soldiers were dead in their camp, without a single arrow fired at them. Historians try to explain this with a sudden epidemic, perhaps a plague, but this explanation does not survive a logical analysis. A disease does not kill 185,000 young and healthy men in a single night, so selectively, without leaving 6 survivors or infecting the neighboring city. The analysis of the data from this event points to something different. The instantaneous death of such a large number of biological targets in a contained area and without collateral damage to structures is the unmistakable signature of advanced weaponry. Simulations suggest the use of a neutron weapon or a microwave radiation pulse capable of stopping the hearts of everyone in its range. The biblical text says that the angel of the Lord went out and struck the camp. What seemed like a miracle revealed itself to be a surgical extermination operation executed by a single agent with a weapon of mass destruction. The pattern repeats in an even older and more famous event, the fall of Jericho. The story, we are told, is about faith. The Israelites marched around the city for 7 days. They blew their trumpets, shouted, and the insurmountable walls collapsed. It sounds like a fairy tale, but if we analyze the event as an engineering problem, the image changes. The troops march in a specific pattern, creating a rhythmic vibration in the ground. The trumpets and shouts are not random. They are synchronized, focusing on a specific sound frequency. At the center of it all, they carry a crucial object, the Ark of the Covenant. The texts provide a precise diagram of the Ark, a box of acacia wood, an excellent electrical insulator, overlaid inside and out with pure gold, a perfect conductor. Any electrical engineer recognizes this immediately. It is the design of a capacitor, a device made to store and discharge an immense electrical charge. What happened in Jericho was the application of a sonic weapon. The Ark acted as the power source, and the synchronized marching and shouting focused the vibrations on the resonance frequency of the stone walls. At the right moment, a directed discharge of energy, amplified by the sound, caused a catastrophic structural failure. The walls did not fall, they were pulverized. These interventions raise an even larger question. Why did they care? Why help one people conquer a city or annihilate the army of another? The answer seems to lie in a behavioral pattern that repeats in various mythologies: proxy warfare. Sumerian texts, much older than the Bible, speak of rival gods who used humanity as pawns in their own conflicts. Instead of getting their own hands dirty, they chose a group of humans, provided knowledge, weapons, and tactical support, and launched them against the group supported by a rival faction. This completely rewrites the story of the fallen angels. In the Book of Enoch, angels like Azazel are condemned for teaching men metallurgy, the making of swords, shields, and knives. Traditionally, this is seen as an act of corruption, the introduction of evil into the world. But under strategic analysis, this does not look like corruption. It looks like an arms deal. These beings were not giving us tools to evolve out of kindness. They were turning us into more efficient soldiers for their own wars. They were improving their assets on the battlefield. We were not their children to be protected, we were their private army. We are dealing with physical entities using warfare technology. Our next question must be about their biology. The biology of these entities requires a specific source of sustenance, described in ancient texts as light and fire. For our ancestors, this was the language of divinity. For us, it is the language of physics, specifically plasma physics. We live in a small oasis of cold, solid matter, and so we think this is the norm. But 99% of the visible universe is not solid, liquid, or gas. It is plasma, the fourth state of matter. Stars are plasma, lightning is plasma, fire is plasma. It is matter in its most energetic state. And when we revisit sacred texts with this knowledge, descriptions of divine encounters cease to be miracles and become technical reports. The most famous case is that of Moses and the burning bush, a bush that burns intensely but does not turn to ash. This is physically impossible for a normal fire, which is a chemical combustion reaction. But this is the exact description of a low-temperature plasma phenomenon. The light and heat do not come from the burning of wood. They come from a field of ionized gas surrounding the bush. The bush is not the fuel. It is just the object at the center of the energy field. This association with fire is relentless. God is described as a consuming fire. When he descends on Mount Sinai, the entire mountain shakes and fills with smoke, like the smoke of a furnace. During the Exodus, the Israelites are guided by a pillar of cloud during the day and a pillar of fire at night. A simulation of this phenomenon suggests a vertical plasma structure generating a powerful electromagnetic field. During the day, this field would ionize the air, causing moisture to condense and forming a dense cloud. At night, the glow of the plasma itself would become visible as fire. It is pure physics. The highest-ranking beings in the angelic hierarchy, the seraphim, reinforce this idea. The name seraphim in Hebrew comes from the root saraph, which means to burn. They are literally the burning ones. The prophet Isaiah does not describe them as handsome men with wings, but as beings of pure fire with 6 wings that they use to cover their faces and feet. Religious interpretation speaks of humility. A technical analysis suggests shielding. They would be covering their energy cores so as not to incinerate the human observer with their radiation and heat. The aureolas, the famous halos painted over the heads of saints and angels, may be another example of this physics. A comparison between images of halos and photographs of a corona effect, the electrical discharge that occurs around a high-voltage conductor, shows a 100% resemblance. The halo would not be a symbol of holiness, but a physical sign of the ionization of the air around a being with an immense electrical potential. It is less a divine symbol and more of a caution high-voltage sign. This would explain why direct contact with these entities was so dangerously regulated. Only the high priest could enter the presence of the ark, and only once a year, wearing special garments and with a rope tied to his ankle. Why? so that if he died inside due to exposure, they could pull his body out without anyone else needing to enter the danger zone. When Moses came down from Sinai after speaking with God, his face emitted light, a radiation so intense that people were afraid to approach him, and he had to wear a veil. Medical analysis of these symptoms points to induced radioactivity. Moses survived a massive dose of radiation, and his own body temporarily became radioactive. The same pattern of energy damage is seen in the conversion of the Apostle Paul. On the road to Damascus, he was knocked down by a light from heaven. When he stood up, he was blind. His sight only returned 3 days later, when scales fell from his eyes. These are the classic symptoms of electro-ophthalmia, a corneal burn caused by intense exposure to ultraviolet light, the same injury suffered by welders who work without a mask. The light from heaven was not a metaphor. It was a pulse of ultraviolet radiation. Even the smell of hell might be a misinterpretation. The smell of sulfur is the classic attribute of a demonic presence, but the smell of sulfur and the smell of ozone, the gas that forms in the air after an electrical discharge like lightning, are very similar to an untrained nose. It is extremely likely that what medieval witnesses described as the smell of sulfur was, in fact, the smell of ionized air. Hell doesn't smell like sulfur, it smells like a storm. Given this evidence, a dark certainty emerges. Angels and demons are not spirits. They are beings of pure energy, capable of manifesting in our physical plane. But if they are energy systems, they need a fuel source. The sun feeds on nuclear fusion, fire feeds on wood. What do angels and demons feed on? And why did all the world's religions at some point practice sacrifice? The conclusion that these entities are made of energy leaves us with an even more disturbing question than that of sacrifice. How does a plasma-based life form interact with the fragile chemistry of the human mind? The answer is that perhaps the interaction is not physical, but informational. Perhaps the true battlefield was never the Earth, but the space inside our skulls. We believe that reality is something solid and external, but neuroscience tells us otherwise. Everything you see, hear, and feel is a simulation, a model created by your mind inside a dark and silent box. Your brain has no direct contact with the world. It only interprets electrical signals. What if this rendering software could be hacked? If someone could inject images and sounds directly into your processor? An analysis of the appearance of these beings throughout history reveals a glaring anomaly. In medieval times, angels were described as knights in shining armor, wielding flaming swords. During the Renaissance, they transformed into beautiful androgynous youths or babies with wings. In the 20th century, with the space age, celestial messengers abandoned wings and began piloting silver metal ships. Why would an eternal and immutable being change its appearance to follow human fashion? Logic points in a haunting direction. They have no fixed form. They are like a mirror. Upon coming into contact with a human consciousness, they scan our cultural database, our fears and our hopes, and project the image we will be most capable of accepting. For a medieval knight, the pinnacle of power was another knight. For a Cold War pilot, it was a pilot of a superior ship. The form is not theirs, it is ours. They clothe themselves in our expectations. This ability to influence perception is not fiction. In laboratories, scientists can replicate the sensation of a mystical presence. Neuroscientist Michael Persinger created the God Helmet, a device that stimulates the brain's temporal lobes with weak magnetic fields. 80% of the volunteers who wore the helmet reported mystical experiences. They saw lights, heard voices, felt an invisible entity in the same room as them. The brain readings of these volunteers are practically identical to those of monks in deep meditation or people in a state of religious ecstasy. This means our brain has a built-in antenna, a specific frequency at which it is ready to receive this type of signal. And if this antenna can be activated artificially, it can also be activated by an external source. This reformulates the story of figures like Joan of Arc or Socrates, who were guided by voices. Modern medicine could diagnose them with temporal lobe epilepsy, but there is a paradox. Instead of debilitating them, the voices gave them strategic genius and superhuman clarity. This leads us to a radical hypothesis. What if angels and demons are not beings, but rather a species of information virus, a self-replicating code that doesn't need a physical body, but a mental host to exist? An angelic virus infects a host and programs it to build hierarchies, follow rules, sacrifice itself, and spread the idea of salvation to others. A demonic virus programs it for chaos, fear, and conflict, generating a different kind of energy. Both compete for the same resources, the processing time of the human mind. Proof that this mental projection technology exists on a large scale happened in 1917 in Fatima, Portugal. 70,000 people gathered in an open field witnessed the same impossible event. The sun detached from the sky, spun like a wheel of fire, changed color, and plunged in a zigzag towards the earth. But that was not a real event. If the sun had moved 1 centimeter, life on Earth would have ended. No observatory in the world recorded any anomaly. What happened in Fatima was a mass hallucination, perfectly synchronized. Something or someone used a mental control technology of immense power and projected the same image directly into the visual cortex of 70,000 people simultaneously. It was a demonstration of power, proof that they do not need ships to reach us. They have the digital address of our brains. This theory explains the mental manipulation, the visions, and the voices, but it leaves a loose end, a tip of heavy metal and molten stone. If all this is just a shadow play in our minds, where do the physical artifacts come from? The mental theory explains the interface, but not the infrastructure. A hallucination does not leave behind engineering blueprints, and it is at these blueprints written in stone and papyrus that we will look now. Words can be distorted, symbols can be misinterpreted, but an engineering project, a technical manual, does not lie. The time has come to stop reading sacred texts as poetry and start reading them as what they appear to be: technical documentation of advanced equipment. When we do this, the veil of mysticism is torn, and what we see behind it is the cold gleam of metal. Let's begin with the most well-documented case: the vision of the prophet Ezekiel. For centuries, it was interpreted as a surreal allegory, but in 1974, a NASA engineer named Joseph Blumrich decided to analyze the text not as a theologian, but as a systems engineer. He didn't want to prove the existence of a spacecraft. He wanted to prove it was impossible. The result shocked him. By the end of his analysis, he not only concluded that the description was technically coherent, but he also patented an omnidirectional wheel model based directly on the biblical text. Newmar's analysis went even further. Every detail described by Ezekiel corresponds to a functional component of a landing vehicle. Straight legs with calves' feet, a landing gear with circular pads, ideal for unstable surfaces. The wings that made a deafening noise, like many waters, are the perfect description of the low-frequency sound of jet engines or turboprops. The famous wheels within wheels that moved in any direction without turning are an advanced propulsion system. The conclusion is inevitable. Ezekiel did not see God. He saw a suborbital transport vehicle of approximately 50 tons, capable of vertical takeoff and landing. Now let's return to the Ark of the Covenant. We have already identified it as a weapon and a capacitor. But why would a nomadic people in the desert need a giant, dangerous battery? The answer may lie in another, even more mysterious text: the Zohar, the principal book of the Kabbalah. The Zohar describes a machine called the Ancient of Days, using language that seems like pure mysticism: skulls, beards, oil, dew. But when engineers applied a technical translation algorithm to these terms, the code was broken. Skull was the casing. Beard was tubes and filaments. Dew was the condensate. The text did not describe a god. It described a food processing machine. The analysis reconstructed the diagram. It was a bioreactor. It condensed moisture from the air and, using an intense light source, grew a culture of algae, probably chlorella. These algae, when processed, turn into a highly nutritious green paste. And what was the power source for this machine? A compact nuclear reactor, small enough to be transported inside the Ark of the Covenant. This is why the Ark emitted radiation. This is why it was deadly to the touch. This is why the priests who operated it needed protective garments and followed a rigid safety protocol. And manna from heaven was the final product, an algae paste with a sweetish taste, produced in sufficient quantities to sustain the expedition's core. The God who guided his people through the desert did not perform miracles. He used a machine. Their weapons were equally technological. To guard the Garden of Eden, God did not station an angel to stand guard eternally. The text says, "He placed a cherubim and a flaming sword, which turned every way." The Hebrew word for revolving or turning means to spin, to turn in all directions. It is the description of an automated perimeter defense system. A robotic sentry tower equipped with a laser or a plasma weapon and motion sensors. It is the most efficient engineering solution and has nothing to do with a winged being. This technology was not limited to the Middle East. In the Vedic texts of India, such as the Mahabharata and the Vaimanika Shastra, we find detailed descriptions of flying ships called Vimanas. Skeptics dismiss these texts, but they contain technical details that could not have been invented. They speak of different types of Vimanas powered by mercury vortex engines. Modern science is only beginning to explore the idea that mercury, when heated and spun at high speeds, can generate anti-gravity fields. The texts describe the necessary metal alloys, the mirrors used to absorb sunlight and create invisibility, stealth technology, and weapons that could paralyze enemy armies. They are not fairy tales, they are manuals. All of this leads us to a disturbing conclusion about ourselves. We are a cargo cult. We are like the natives of remote islands who, after seeing planes landing and delivering supplies during the war, began building replicas of planes with bamboo and straw. They built landing strips, used headphones made of coconuts, and marched in formation, hoping the metal birds would return with more cargo. Our religions are this on a global scale. Our cathedrals and temples are the straw plains. Our rituals, our priestly garments, our chants are the imitation of technical procedures we no longer understand. We pray to a broken radio transmitter, thinking that the voice of God still lives inside. We kiss the casing of a deactivated nuclear reactor, believing it will bring us healing, while it slowly poisons us with the memory of its power. We are the heirs to a technology we have forgotten how to use. But if they had this technology and clearly did not leave it for us, the question is, where did they go? The conclusion that we are a cargo cult, imitating forgotten technology, leaves us with the most obvious question. Where did the engineers go? We spend billions of dollars pointing telescopes at the stars, looking for them in distant galaxies. It is our greatest miscalculation. We don't find them because we are looking in the wrong direction. They are not out there. They are here in the same room as us, just at a 90-degree angle to our reality. Visualize a two-dimensional universe, a flat world like a sheet of paper. Its inhabitants are geometric shapes that only know length and width. For them, the concept of up or down does not exist. Now imagine that you, a three-dimensional being, decide to pass your finger through this flat world. What would the two-dimensional inhabitants see? They wouldn't see a finger. They would see a terrifying miracle. Out of nowhere, a small point would appear. This point would instantly transform into a circle that would grow, change shape, and then shrink until it vanished into nothingness. A material object appeared, violated their laws of physics, and then dematerialized. They would call it a god or a ghost. The same rule applies to our reality. We live in 3 dimensions. The theory validated by Newman's analysis is that angels and demons are beings from a 4th spatial dimension or higher. When one of these 4-dimensional entities crosses our 3-dimensional universe, we don't see it in its entirety. We see only a slice, a projection. We see the circle growing and shrinking. This is why they seem to appear and disappear out of thin air. This is why they can pass through walls. For a 4-dimensional being, a closed room is not a sealed space, it's an open box. He can enter it from above, through the 4th dimension, just as you can place your finger inside a square drawn on paper without crossing the line. This hypothesis explains phenomena that our physics considers impossible. Unidentified flying objects that make 90-degree turns at hypersonic speeds are not breaking the laws of inertia. They are not flying in our space. They are the 3-dimensional projection of a moving 4-dimensional object. Think of a laser pointer's dot on a wall. The dot can jump from one side to the other instantly because it is not a physical object traveling across the wall. It is the projection of a source that is elsewhere. They are the source, and their appearances are the dot of light. This also sheds new light on reports of missing time, common in both fairy tales about the hill folk and modern alien abductions. A person who spends one night in the fairy realm returns to find that 100 years have passed in our world. Abductees lose hours of their lives with no memory. This is a time dilation effect. Being near an interdimensional portal or a massive 4-dimensional gravity source would literally distort the flow of time around it, exactly as the theory of relativity predicts. They do not live in our time. For them, our past, present, and future may be a single, observable panorama. This is why prophecies work. They are not guessing the future. They are reading a map of events that for them have already happened. Here lies the final shadow. Why are we here and they there? The analysis concludes that Earth is not an open planet. It is a controlled environment, an enclave, a biological reserve, or perhaps a prison. We were isolated from the rest of the universe by a perception barrier. Our 5 senses are not windows to reality. They are filters tuned to capture only a tiny slice of the total spectrum. We are blind and deaf to 99% of what is happening around us. This was done on purpose. Gnostic tradition interprets the passage in Genesis where God gives Adam and Eve coats of skins, not as animal hides, but as our physical bodies. A dense biological shell designed to lock in our consciousness and prevent us from seeing the larger, more real world that exists around us. But sometimes the barrier fails. The system glitches. The phenomenon of sleep paralysis, for example, wouldn't just be a neurological failure. It would be a moment when the perception filter software freezes. And for a brief, terrifying instant, we see what is in the room with us. We see the observers, the prison guards. If they are interdimensional, we have no defense. Walls are useless. Bunkers are futile. They can observe us at any time, anywhere. The concept of privacy is an illusion, but this raises the final question. Why all this effort? Why create an isolated environment and observe its inhabitants so carefully? A farmer doesn't build a fence around his field just to admire the crops. He builds it to protect them, to manage them, and eventually for the harvest. Why build an interdimensional prison and watch it for millennia? For the same reason a farmer builds a fence around a pasture. It's not out of hatred for the herd. It's to manage a resource. We have been the harvest. Newman's final analysis focused on the only question that matters. What is the resource we are providing? The answer is not in our bodies or our labor. It is in something we produce non-stop every day. Emotion. Physics tells us that every emotion is a biochemical and electrical discharge in the brain. It is energy, fear, anger, suffering, anguish, but also ecstasy, fanatical worship, blind devotion. Each of these feelings emits a specific frequency. In esoteric texts, this energy has a name, Gava. It is a subtle emanation, invisible to us, but which for higher dimensional entities may be the equivalent of food, an energy source. Suddenly, human history ceases to be a chaotic succession of events and becomes a farm's schedule. World wars, pandemics, witch hunts, the constant flood of news designed to generate fear and division are not accidents. They are harvest cycles. Moments when the production of Gava from minds focused on the same terror and pain creates an energetic banquet. This finally explains the false duality between angels and demons. They are not enemies. They are two factions of the same agricultural corporation, growing different products. The demonic faction specializes in low frequencies, fear, hatred, pain, depravity. They encourage tyrants, wars, and suffering, for that is what they feed on. The angelic faction, on the other hand, feeds on the high frequencies of devotion, worship, self-sacrifice, submission. The energy of millions of people on their knees, surrendering their will to a higher power. Think of the terminology. We are the flock, guided by a shepherd. A shepherd cares for his sheep, protects them from wolves, but in the end, he is the one who keeps the wool and the meat. Whether in the ecstasy of a cathedral or the despair of a battlefield, the energy flows in the same direction, upward, outward, to feed the farmers. Heaven and hell are not destinations. They are processing plants designed to extract every drop of energy from consciousness after the death of the body. But the analysis revealed a fundamental flaw in their system, a critical vulnerability. They can manipulate, deceive, frighten, and seduce, but they cannot create our energy. They can only harvest it. They are parasites, and a parasite has no power over a host that decides to stop feeding it. This leads us to the final conclusion, the escape algorithm. You don't need a weapon, a ship, or a magic ritual. The key lies in the only thing that is truly ours, attention. It begins by cutting off the supply. It's about becoming a cold observer of your own emotions. When the world tries to push you toward fear or hatred, observe the sensation, but do not become it. Refuse to generate their food. Conscious neutrality is poison to the parasite. Stop worshipping. Kneeling before anything, be it an altar, a flag, or a celebrity, is connecting a power cable from your consciousness directly into their system. Stand up. Next, the contract is revoked. The most fundamental universal law, even for them, seems to be that of free will. They cannot take our energy by force if we consciously deny it. You must make a declaration of sovereignty to yourself, out loud if necessary. I revoke all agreements, conscious or unconscious, that allow my energy to be drained. My consciousness is mine. My power is mine. This is not a prayer. It is an eviction notice. The last step is remembrance. They programmed us to look for all the answers on the outside, in saviors, in gurus, on screens. The final act of rebellion is to turn your attention inward. In the silence behind the constant noise of thoughts, there is a consciousness that simply observes. This consciousness has no fear, no dogma, and cannot be controlled. When you identify with that observer and not with the programmed mind, the game ends. The prison has no physical walls. It is built with the mirrors of our own perception. They kept us looking at the reflections they created, scared by the monsters and awed by the angels. But escape was never about breaking the mirrors. It was about realizing that we are the ones looking at them. If you enjoyed this investigation, your subscription to the channel and any donation value help us expand Project Pneuma. We would love to read your reflection on the subject of the video in the comments and your suggestion for the next theme to be addressed. Tell us which city you are watching from. Thank you for your company until the end, M.